how to use buttons in Notion and why they matter. Now, just a quick sort of premise of everything you're about to see here. It assumes that you're using my Notion Mastery operating system. So if you're not, that's okay. Just bear with me. There are going to be some references to things like databases that we're using in the system. All you have to do is, in your own mind, think through in terms of how yours might work. You know, it's the same idea, but for example, if we're talking about tasks and you're using Notion to track tasks, then hopefully those are being tracked in a database. I can't imagine any other way to do it. So when you see me reference the task database, it just means you would be in that moment referencing your own tasks database. And the same will be true of notes. Those are the two things we're going to learn how to do here. And here's the basic premise of where this comes from. In my system, we have the daily journal. In the daily journal, we capture everything that hits us throughout the day. It's something that helps us stay incredibly focused on whatever work we're doing in the moment. So if an input comes in, I get a message, I don't want to forget about it, and I don't even want to take the time to mark it unread or something or whatever. I just go into my daily journal because it's open all day, because that's my process, is I keep my journal open all day. So in less than 10 seconds, I can jot down a note saying, check text message from so-and-so, and then boom, right back to focus. You can generally do things like that, and as long as you're back to focusing within about 10 to 20 seconds, you won't get pulled out of flow. And that's the job here. The job is to eliminate stress by enabling you to stay in flow. That is the happiest state of mind a person can be in, because it's the most present. It's the most in the moment we can ever be. And we can only stay there for certain intervals of time. Once we get pulled out, it can take 25 minutes to get back into like where we were, what we were doing, what we were working on. In other words, we lose our train of thought. And again, it can take 25 minutes to get back in. So this whole system is designed with that process, with the getting things done process in mind, where the whole goal is to keep us focused and to keep us in flow for as long as we can, whenever we can. That's the job. So with that in mind, because I'm capturing things all day in my daily journal, I wanted an easy way to take information that's in my daily journal and peel it off into a more permanent space, like a task or a note that I might need, so that again, I can capture things all day in my journal, and as you'll see, when I create these buttons, it makes it super easy to split the screen side by side. So on my left, I've got my notes that are in my journal. On my right, I've got the task or note, and I can easily copy and paste. And of course, if you know Notion, then you know it will allow you to even sync that data from one block to the other, so that if later on I go make updates to that in the task, it will also be updated sort of retroactively back in the daily journal. And with that in mind, and also the last bit of context I want to make sure is clear as I dive into this, is that the daily journal is your timeline, and everything else, your tasks, your notes, your projects, your clients, all those other things are in spaces, right? Our brains work in those two dimensions, time and space. And so when you have something like the daily journal that records the timeline of everything, and then you have the spaces like tasks, notes, and projects, and documents, and everything else, then you connect the two. What you have is a beautiful neural network of data that makes it really easy for you to categorize, to organize, categorize, and easily reference data when you need it, no matter how long it's been. You don't need to have an independent recollection, because you have a system that tells you exactly where to go to find what you need when you need it. Now let's dive in. So we're starting with the daily journal because, as I said, this is where we are going to capture things, right? The daily journal is what I often also refer to as your front door, where you're going to make notes all day and you're going to capture any inputs, any things, any fleeting thoughts, any information, so that you don't have to stop what you're doing and stress out and try and figure out, well, where am I going to put this to make sure I'm going to see it later, right? And with that, and with Notion, in any database, you have templates. So that's what we're going to look at here. So when I wrote up the write-up, in case you happen to read that first, which you should, then I created this. So I'm going to dive into this, and I'm going to edit it. So you can see, so this is the template, which means going forward, anytime I use this template, this is what's going to show up. So the finished product is going to be here, where over here it says, write the poop here, right? And then so all day I'm making notes, whatever I need. Then at the end of the day, I come back here and I can look it over and decide, do I need a new task, you know, where I can peel off any of this information into a task or a new note. I've got the buttons here to do that. And of course, once you see how to create these, you'll see it's very easy to create any other button that you would want to sort of open up a page in any other database, right? But these are the two primary ones that I think most of us are going to need most likely on a daily basis, right? So I'm going to do something very scary here, and I'm going to delete those buttons because I want to show you how to build them from scratch, okay? And that's what we're going to do. So first we're going to do the task, and then as you'll see, once we build the task button, we basically just duplicate it and swap out information to create the notes button. So once we create one, very, very easy to create any of the others that we might need. So I'm going to open this up to a full page so we can focus. Over here, I'm going to type /button, B-U-T-T is enough to get the choice, right? And so these are blocks. When I hit the / in Notion and I start typing something, it's bringing up blocks that I can use to build things on a page. That's what Notion is all about. It's all about the blocks, right? And the first thing we're going to do is name the button, so I'll call it new task, and then we can assign an emoji to the button. And some people probably think these emojis are silly, but I can promise you these little visuals make all the difference. It makes the whole experience better. I mean, look at these toggles up here. It gives you the visual that helps enhance the experience. If I'm going to spend time in a system like this, I want it to be a place I enjoy, a place I enjoy being in, you know, that's visually appealing. So we've got that. The trigger, of course, is when the button's clicked. There's no other thing we could do there, nor is there anything else we would want to do other than trigger it based on the fact that somebody clicked the button. And what's the first thing we want to do when somebody clicks the button? Let's click here. And the other thing I want to encourage you to do, if you're doing this, if you're following along, is analyze these dialogues. Because besides what we're about to do, which of course I'm going to show you, I also want you to get in the habit, especially if you're new to Notion, of exploring something like this and asking yourself a very simple but very powerful question, which is, what's possible? What could I do with a button like this besides the thing I'm about to do, which is to add a new task? Okay? And that kind of gives you a clue of what we want to do here, which is I want to add a page 2. Right? And then it's going to ask me to select a data source, which is a database, right? This is where I'm going to choose my tasks database. And I have NMOS, stands for Notion Mastery Operating System. That's my operating system, which if you want access to this, you can. I sell it along with a whole course that teaches you all of this stuff and how to use it and build things with it and so on. So I'm going to choose my tasks database, okay? Over here, it's going to assume that I want to use whatever my default template is for any new task. So, of course, that's fine. Now, what do we want to call this task? Now, here's what I want you to think about when you're designing something like this. Again, that's why I took so much time to lay out the context as detailed as I did, because that helps inform the thinking, the thought process that goes into the creation of something like this. So let's pretend now that I just clicked this button because I'm in my daily journal. It's the end of the day. I'm tired, but I don't want to forget to do this. I don't want to have to come back and do it tomorrow morning. So let's say I'm in a rush, in other words, and I really don't want to take the time. And so I'm just going to click the task, copy the information over, and I'll clarify it tomorrow. I'll deal with the rest of it tomorrow. Meaning it's very possible in that frame of mind that I'm going to forget to title the thing properly, right? So bearing that in mind, here's what I want to do. Is I'm going to just title, so this means when I create this new task, here's what the title of that page, or in this case task, is going to be. So I'm going to call this new task from, and over here the @ sign lets you dynamically add information such as the page that we're on when we click this button. So I can grab a property from this page, okay? And what I want to do is I want to choose the title, which I happen to know is called journal entry, right? That's actually how I named that first primary column in this database, right? If you're unsure, then here's what you do. I'll go over to my operating system here, and I'll go here to the Notion Mastery Operating System. And I want to look at what I actually called that column. This is a gallery view. Over here I've got a table view, and this is where I can confirm this is the title column for anything that I add to my daily journal database. So if you're unsure of what to choose, open it up in a second tab so you can reference the information. A little extra time now will save you probably a lot of time later on. So that's all I need. New task from. and then I want to make sure there's like a space. And basically what this is going to do is put that journal entry's title, which the way I name my journal entries is going to be based on the very detailed description of today's date. So it'll spell out, you know, Friday, October 10th, 2025. And there's reasons for that, which I get into in the course. I don't want to get sidetracked from the task at hand here, which, funny enough, is to create a new task. So now I've established we're going to add a task. We're going to add something to the task database. We're going to use that template. Here's what we're going to call it. And now I have options to edit any properties that I want to in the tasks database. In other words, what kind of defaults would I want it to assume when I add this new task, right? So here are all the properties that exist in the task database. So what's the first thing I might want? I don't care about the client yet. And also what I know is that in another step after this, I'm going to have it open up this new task in side peek mode so that I can do the copying and pasting, and also I can clarify any of this kind of stuff. I can't assume I know what client it's going to be for at this stage, right? Nor the project or any of these other things. So the first thing I see here that I definitely want to make sure I'm clear on is the status, and then over here it lists the statuses. As it turns out, my Notion system is set up to default any new task to the inbox status, but this is just extra assurance that that's for sure where it's going to land, and that's exactly what I want. The next important thing is this next due date. And without going into another rabbit hole about what this is all about, you might have noticed the distinction I make between the due DO date and the DUE date, right? This is what I care about, especially at this stage, is when am I going to work on this next? Not when it's due, but when do I need to work on this next? So by default, because for me, and this is an example of what I refer to, what I learned from, you know, David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, where the app itself isn't going to get me organized. It's the sort of rules of engagement for how I interact with the app that's going to make all the difference. And in this case, what that means is I have rules. So when I have a next due date, I want a timestamp on that, right? And everything needs to have the date. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the time triggered, and that just means it's going to include both the date and the time, because I want that to remind me when I look back at this later that I need to update that to the date I'm actually going to do it. And then I use the timestamps not necessarily to say exactly when I'm going to do the thing, but I'll group tasks based on a time of the day, as in this is the cluster of tasks that I expect I'll be working on, let's say at 9 a.m. on Monday, right? So that's the next due date. What else might I want? I definitely want the assigned to go to the person who clicked, right? And I love how Notion gives me these dynamic options here, right? In this case, it's really only ever going to be me, but still, it's not a terrible thing to include there. Okay, I don't care about the due date because I only care about the DO date, right? I don't need tags. I don't need any of this other stuff. Obviously, you can, you know, put whatever you want here, but keep in mind, this is just to make sure that I capture certain defaults in case I decide I want to go back and do the rest of the clarifying later, okay? And so that takes care of all the properties I want to update when I go to create this task. The only thing left to do is add an action. Now this is something, by the way, that I learned sort of through School of Hard Knocks, because when the first time I sat down to create this, I thought I was done here. I clicked done, I went, I tested the button, and I'm like, you know, so I'm in my daily journal, I click the new task button, and I'm like, okay, where's the task at? I just assumed it would know to open the task for me. Sure enough, when I navigated over to my task database, there it was, you know, because my task list is configured to show anything inbox status-wise at the top, right? So I went there, sure enough, it was there, and I was like, no, that's not good enough. There's got to be a way to tell it to just immediately open this task up for me, and sure enough, there is. And this is why you want to start to learn how to study these things. So even though you're here to complete one sort of thing, always, always, always take the time, if you can, to slow down a little bit and explore. And again, ask yourself that question, what's possible? Sure enough, when I click the add action, one of the options is here, open a page or form or a URL. Now, the first time I saw this, I'm like, all right, I hope there's going to be a way for me to tell it to open up this page I just created, right? Because again, this has to be generic. I can't assume I know exactly which page it's going to be that it needs to open. It needs to be something dynamic. So when I click that and it says select page, initially I'm thinking, oh man, it's probably going to need an exact page, but that doesn't really make sense. So never assume anything. Always test these things. And sure enough, when I choose this option looked about right the first time, and now I can confirm that it is. And what I also love about the way this dialog works is over here, that number 1 in the black circle means that's from step 1. So literally it's telling me we're going to select the page added from step 1, the previous step in this automation. So I choose that, and then the next thing is, by default, it wants to open it in center peak, which means it's going to pop it up on your screen in the middle. I don't want that because, remember, I've got my daily journal open. I want this open on my right so I can easily scroll and copy and paste whatever information I need from this journal entry that needs to go into this new task. And keep in mind, at the end of a day, I might have several tasks. It's not like I'm just copying everything from the whole journal entry into this task. So we're going to change this to side peak. Okay, and then I'm going to click done, and then I want to test it, right? And I'm still in the template, bear that in mind, very important. So the best way to test something like this is to get out of the template, and since I've got another tab open here, what I'm going to do is go to the daily journal. I'm going to create a new journal entry. Okay, it's going to load the template, and actually it's going to load the wrong template because I forgot to choose the template. So the default template in the system is not this one because I just created this one. So I can proactively choose it and say this is the template I want. And sure enough, it loads. So now I'm in a live page that I created based on that template. And when I click new task, sure enough, and look how it named it, right? And I hadn't updated the title yet. So let's do that to make sure that part's working. Right? Again, never assume anything. So I'm going to say Daily Journal, Friday, October 10th, 2025. Okay. And over here, let's just put that in. The looking glass, not part of today's topic, but since we're looking at it, what I like to do with my journal entries is set the looking glass date for a year into the future with a reminder so that a year from today I'll get this sent back to me. And I love the insights I get reading my journal entries, especially when I've taken the time to really write things in them. So in addition to the timeline of what I'm working on, I also do, of course, record my thoughts and feelings and the typical type of stuff you think of that goes in a journal entry. And even I always take the time to answer these questions every day. So now that I've got this titled properly, let's click New Task. And there it is, new task from Daily Journal. Now, one thing, you may not care, but I noticed the extra space here, which bugs me. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to the template, right? And always make sure, if you intend to be in the template, that you see this part here, right? You're editing a template. And because this is very easy to do, when I set this up, I didn't assume it would put a space in for me. So I added a space, which meant there's an extra space. Done. Over here. Let's move this to the trash. And again, click here to test. And it's, oh, duh. It's the button wasn't updated because I updated it in the template. All right, so important. This might be something that I'd be inclined to want to edit out of the video, but actually I want you to see it because you might make the same mistake. So let's get back to the top here. All right, this is the template. So first, in order to make sure that I am reflecting an update like that I've made in the template, I need to create a new journal entry. Okay, and again, wrong template. So let's try again. Okay. Friday, October 10th. And there's a method to my madness here why I insist on being this detailed in the naming, and the quick answer is it has to do with when I'm searching the database later on. If I'm looking for something that I know happened on a Friday, I can search the weekday, right? Or any of these other pieces of information, as opposed to if I just did 10/10/25, that's much harder to search. It doesn't give me the information I need, okay? Now that we've got that, I will click New Task, and sure enough, that opens me up, right? And it's got the date and no extra space, so no like grammar check kind of thing screaming at me. The other thing you'll notice it did is it took me out to the daily journal and then opened this in SidePeek. Now, why did that happen? I'll tell you why. because I was in here in what's called center peak when I clicked the button. So that's another important dumb little detail, is open it in full page first. You should always do that anyway, because the journal is something you really want to be focused on, right? Now if I click new task, boom, it creates it, titles it perfectly, and let's just say there was something in here, something I need to do, right? So this is where I could take this, copy it, okay, and be careful where you are. I hesitated there for a second because even though I was clicking, for some reason my cursor was over here, and I noticed that, which is why I didn't just continue. Now really what you want to do, it's tempting because you're used to doing this in most kind of document tools, is to just highlight like that and copy it. But the way Notion works is everything is in a block. And what I really want to do is I want to copy the whole block. So I click the block, it gives me this, right? I don't want to duplicate it because that's just going to make another copy on the same page. I could copy a link to the block. So let's do that. And let's say I'm going to put it here under what do I need to do next. Control V to paste. And this is what I mentioned earlier that I want you to see. This is where this gets so powerful, because now I could choose that it's a synced block. Right now, remember, this is living over in my task database. When I close this, it's no longer going to be accessible from here, not easily, right? But now, if I go in here, notice the line that defines what portion of this is synced. If I go down here, I'm not in the sync block anymore. But up here, I can add a row. Notice it updated here accordingly. If I click back over here, I can see the same thing. And then I can type, then I need to do this, and see how that's updating on my left. So this will hold true no matter where I access this task. So if in a month from now, for some reason I'm still working on this and I'm adding to these notes, I know I can do this knowing that if I also reach this through my timeline, through my journal entry, I will still see this information over here. And of course the beauty is I can zip this up in case it starts to get very long. So you don't have to sync everything. I don't always sync everything, but it's definitely helpful to know that you can do something synced, because again, if the idea is I want to take the thoughts or ideas I had that I recorded in my journal during the day, and I know I'm going to want to expand on them, whether it's in the task or a note, which we're going to create next, I want to know that the source of that in the timeline is also going to reflect that update, that they're going to be linked, right? And so that's really slick. Now, to create the same button, except in case I want to add it as a note and not a task, all we're going to do is notice that the button has its own block icon, okay? So this we're going to choose duplicate, and then I'm going to edit this one, and I'm going to rename this and say new note, and probably give it a different icon, right? Emoji, notepad. And here, when I change this, because now we're not going to add it to the task database any longer, I want to add it to the notes database, right? So it doesn't come up in the recent ones, so let's go notes, and I want NMOS notes. And this is where naming becomes important, because I also have nerd notes, which is my own actual notes database, right? So always name things, and notice how the visual helps here in terms of having that emoji. So this is where the emojis aren't just silly or fun, they actually help here a lot. So I choose the notes database. Notice it resets all the properties because it's a different database which has its own properties. General notes is fine, that's the template, and the note title is going to be similar. I'll just say new note from, and then at this page and journal entry. Okay, and then I can look here to see, are there any other properties that I would want to update? And again, this would mean like default information that would go into any new note that I create off a journal entry, right? The date, sure, let's make the date again based on the time triggered. And you click edit property, think of it like you're just kind of going shopping for properties to decide what would I want here by default. And if it's the kind of thing that you know there's no way you're going to be able to fill it in until you're in the real live use case where you're actually creating the note so you know what client it's for, etc., then you obviously don't assign those here. This is just whatever you would want to know was going to come in there by default whenever you create a new one, right? So status might be good. Maybe it's not started. Maybe it's in progress. Since I'm creating the note, it's probably fair to say that it's going to be in progress, right? or leave it alone. That's totally up to you, but that's the idea here. And then we still have our other step of saying open it in SidePeek once I'm done. Okay, so now we're going to create a new journal entry. I'll use the right template. All right, and again, when you're editing these things, make sure you're in the template so that it'll work when you go to create a new one. There's my new note. I'm going to click it, and sure enough, it pulls in the title. I didn't rename this one, so it still says Daily Journal Simple. All right, again, I like to be extra thorough. So now this is the daily journal. So let's just say, again, it's from Friday, October 10th. Perfect. Now when I create new note, it pulls that in, new note, and obviously I can rename this to whatever I want, but like I said at the beginning, this is in case I'm off and running and back to work right after I create this note. I don't have to worry about this, and this title will make it very clear to me that this is a note I need to come back and clarify, as in what is the proper title of this note? What kind of information did I put in here? This could be meeting notes based on a meeting I had with a client or customer, right? Where oftentimes I'll do that. I'll just take notes in the daily journal, right? Sometimes it'll take on the form of what's called a toggle, because I can put all kinds of information into something like this, right? Meeting with whoever, right? Enter. I like to put a divider on these things, and then these are my notes, right? And so when I'm ready to copy this over, because it's later in the day and I click new note, I can just take this whole block, Control C, come in here, Control V to paste, and it pastes it in. Notice these are not synced, and I didn't even get the prompt to sync them. So if you want to make sure that they are synced, right, then click the block icon and choose copy link to block. Over here we'll just do empty and paste, and when you paste that, you get the synced block option. This way, again, if I'm back over here and after the meeting, maybe I'm reviewing the notes that my AI assistant took in Zoom or whatever, bottom line, as I'm in here in the notes, and this is going to get assigned to the customer, right? So if this is a meeting with the Daily Planet, this is going to get assigned, and that way as I'm here and updating my notes and saying do this and that and blah blah blah, notice what's happening on my left and back in the daily journal, right? So I can close this, and I can zip that up and have all the other things that I want to capture throughout the day in my daily journal, and I know that this is all taken care of. And notice while I'm in here, it gives me this dialog, which would enable me also to quickly click over and say, oh, okay, let's go to the daily journal, and boom, now I'm purely in that note, writing my notes, doing whatever I need to do, adding to it. And of course, if for any reason there's information I add here that I don't want synced back to the journal, that's fine. Just click anywhere else on the page that's not surrounded by that border that kind of lets you know, hey, this stuff is synced. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, basically, folks. So bottom line, these buttons can be very useful and handy and powerful even in terms of grabbing data from one place that you might have recorded it in Notion and pushing it into its, in these cases, permanent space. I'm hoping there's an infinite number of other use cases you can find for how to use buttons in Notion, and if you come up with them, I would love to hear them. So comment on this video wherever you happen to be watching this. If it's on YouTube, great. I'll get notified, I'll respond. If you want to click the link that takes you over to read the write-up and watch this video in my community at Talk Nerdy to Me, then I will definitely love to have the dialogue with you there, and I'm sure all the other members of the community will really appreciate any sort of input and feedback you have in terms of what you want to do with this kind of information, what you can do, what's possible, and most importantly, of course, if you have any questions and anything I can help you with to clarify or to just take this 10 steps further, then by all means, please post those as well, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can with any answers I can provide.